I have finished another Lovecraft short story. I finished Call of Cthulhu, which is probably the one of the best known just because it's the one that kind of mentions one of the major elder gods when we're talking about the mythology that Lovecraft created. Call of Cthulhu is kind of an odd story. It's longer. It's not as long as Shadow over Innsmouth and stuff like that, but it is a longer one because it's divided into three sections. Because you have a narrator which is what Lovecraft tends to do. Is you have like your one narrator person, and he's there talking about a family member who just dropped dead on walking up a road, and he is going through his papers and things, and he finds these weird papers that are all kind of interconnected. It's actually in three parts. The first part is the papers that he finds that were his relatives' actual the relatives study that he did, that he found this guy that was having these weird dreams where he was getting this snippet of some sort of like saying that mentioned something about Cthulhu, and had this really sort of ambiance of this horrible city that was very algae covered and gross and angular and weird and all of that. So he pays this guy who's this kind of eccentric artist or whatever who keeps having these dreams. He's paying him to tell him, because he's doing the study of all these dreams that this guy's having. Then all of a sudden the guy gets sick, and then he never has these dreams again. So that's the whole kind of back story of that first section. Then as the narrator is studying the papers, he finds another story that I guess it was his uncle or his great uncle that this person was, that he finds another story that this person had based their research off of, which was a bunch of historians who had all gotten together and were very fascinated with this one historian who had talked about, he was down, I believe the implication is Louisiana, it seems to be, and the people who were living in kind of the bayou area were all horrified because these people kept going missing, and they said there was some sort of crazy ritual going out in the bayou. So a posse of men go out there to see what's going on, and I suppose this is really the centerpiece of the short story, because this is the really one that really sticks, because when you go in, they get closer and closer until they finally come in, and there's this huge ritual going on, and it is absolutely horrific. There's human sacrifices, there's the Cthulhu statue that keeps popping up here, of him that keeps showing up in all these different, he's the running motif in these stories, and there's this huge massive ceremony going on that they try to arrest all these people who are having this ceremony, and they're just all horrified by this kind of pagan horrible bloodletting that is happening out in the bayou. So that is the second part of the narrator relating the information he was finding about his uncle's papers. And then the third part is this story that he finds that also adds into this, is there was a shipwreck situation where it wasn't really a shipwreck, but they kind of got lost. They thought they were somewhere else. They went off to explore, and it was this bizarre island, and everybody died except this one guy who says that he saw all this horrible stuff, and he has since died. And now the narrator has tied all three of these stories together and has made some sort of connection that there is some sort of great eldritch god that is off somewhere. Something is going on, because they all sort of are tied by this phrase that the one that you hear about with Cthulhu, where they're talking about him sleeping. Cthulhu lies dreaming in R'lyeh or whatever. So that's all tied together. So he's like, oh, I've made all this big connection. I've connected the dots, and his thinking as he has connected all of this together, and he has figured out that there is some horrible cosmic entity that is sort of sitting out there waiting for some moment to come take over the world again. And that's really what Call of Cthulhu is, with a nice helping of racism in it. Because, man, it is very, very clear that when he's talking about all the blood sacrifice pagan rituals, it's very clear he's not talking about white people doing it. He is talking about minorities that are out there, and they're doing this pagan nonsense, whatever. He also keeps tying that all through this one again as well. It is not as overt as Horror at Red Hook and some of the other ones, but it's there, and it's very, very clear that it's these, in Lovecraft's explanation, it is these more primitive cultures that are the ones that are connecting to this horrific eldritch god situation. And that's how it's coming into the quote-unquote civilized world now, is through that, and then through these men who are sort of interested in this kind of nefarious stuff. That's the problem with Lovecraft. If he could have just separated his biases and his bigotry from his writing, the writing is strong without it. And that's the problem, because if you're talking about just imagery, not much happens in this story. There's not a whole lot going on. It's just somebody, my cat's over there. It's just somebody relating what research he's kind of done, and kind of relating some incidents. It's not some big, much more happens in Rats in the Walls, where you've got the twist, and it's got this whole thing where it's revealing how everything kind of fell about in everything, and what the building horror. This one is just somebody, the horror is more the fact that he's putting the pieces together of, this all seems to be connected in some sort of way. And that's why it's a weird story for a horror story to kind of be set up that way. But it is effective, and it's effective because Lovecraft has this way of describing things that it is very unsettling. It's clearly, it's not gory. It's not, kind of Rats in the Walls is kind of different for him, just because there's that big twist in it and like a crazy psycho at the end. But there's nothing about this that's really in any way kind of is horrific. It's just more of this impending sense of something is very, very wrong, and something is out there, and there's never any clear-cut explanation of what it is. There's a lot of hinting around what it might be, and there's a lot of hinting around that it is kind of described a certain way, but there's not really a clear-cut answer on any of it. And I think that's what makes cosmic horror the way it does, is it's not a monster. It's not a thing that you can kind of pinpoint the threat. It's much more of a very unsettling, you can't quite grasp what the threat is. And when the threat finally does show, it's, first off, far too late, and nothing you could have done to prevent it anyway. So this cosmic horror situation is very much, that is what the Call of Cthulhu is, because you don't really see anything. Nothing really happens except in him relating all these things he's pieced together, and he thinks that actually might be going on. But it is an unsettling piece, and I understand why it's more weird fiction than anything else. It is an unsettling piece when you read it. It holds your attention going through it, because it does keep changing to these different stories, and how how these tales are interconnected, and they're all connected to some sort of horrific thing nobody can describe and explain. So there is that going on. And I think that is why Lovecraft works in, even with all his problems, why his stories work. And even with his weird kind of language that he uses, why his stories work is because he does have very much a sense of unsettling people as much as possible with the mythology he's built. The feeling that there's something very, very wrong. There's nothing you can do about it. All you can do is kind of sit and watch it slide downhill, and maybe it's better off not knowing. So that is Call of Cthulhu, and it's not bad. It's not for people who are looking for hard, action-packed horror short stories, and it's not even for people who, if you really like Rats in the Walls with the twist ending, that's not really what this is. This is more of an impending doom type short story, and the impending horror of somebody piecing something together that I actually think this is what's happening. So, continuing on, the next one I think I'm going to read is Color Out of Space, and see if I can get that one. We're starting to get into some of the longer ones, because Shadow over Innsmouth and Dunwich Horror and Color Out of Space are a little bit longer than some of the others. So I'll move on from there.